Good evening and welcome to the special committee meeting of council for Monday, November the 17th, 2025. The City of North Bay acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg Nation, home to Nipissing and Doki's First Nations, recognized by the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. We honor Indigenous peoples' contributions, rights, and stewardship, and are committed to learning and building meaningful relationships with all Indigenous communities. Tonight we have two portions of the meeting. The first one will be the water financial plan, and that will be under infrastructure and operations. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Councillor Lana Mitchell, Chair. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Infrastructure and operations have one matter on the agenda this evening. Do any members of council wish to declare a conflict? Seeing none, we'll continue. I will read the draft recommendation that 1, council approve the 2025 to 2034 water financial plan in accordance with Ontario Regulation 453/07 subsection 3.1 paragraph 1 and acknowledges that the water system is financially viable. 2, the 2025 to 2034 water financial plan be made available for public review at the city clerk's office during regular office hours and on the city's website, and a public notice regarding the financial plan's availability be posted in accordance with Ontario Regulation 453/07 subsection 3.1 paragraph 5. And 3, the 2025 to 2034 water financial plan be submitted to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing in accordance with Ontario Regulation 453/07 subsection 3.1 paragraph 6, and a copy of this resolution and a copy of the 2025 to 2034 water financial plan be submitted to the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks in accordance with the Safe Drinking Water Act 2002 subsection 32.5 subparagraph 2ii. I would now like to ask that Ms. Boissonneau and Mr. Mirabella of Hemson Consulting Limited to come forward to present the report for this evening.
I'm pleased to present Report to Council 2025-109, which is key to fulfilling our statutory requirements under Regulation 453/07 regarding the renewal of the city's municipal drinking water license. The purpose of the report is to seek approval for the 2025 to 34 financial plan, to confirm viability, and to authorize per public release. Council has received a preliminary report, Corp 2025-065 on October 28th, outlining our obligations. This supplemental report has an Appendix A, which is the actual water financial plan, and Appendix B, which is the projected financial statements. Hemson Consulting supported the development of the plan with conjunction with staff and will present the overarching plan to you tonight. I'd like to welcome Andrew Mirabella of Hemson Consulting.
Great. Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. Thanks, Laura, for the introduction. My name is Andrew Mirabella, again, from Hemson Consulting, which, as pointed out, we were retained to help support the preparation of this water financial plan, which is a requirement of the legislation to substantiate and complete your safe drinking water license renewal application. So I'll just go through some of the basics and the background here, kind of the context of what we're providing the work under OREG 453/07. Since the kind of Walkerton inquiry, which led to a lot more of a stringent requirement for municipal water systems and the management of it, given the contamination that provided since then. So the province kind of stepped in and made a lot more things mandatory and a lot more closer eye on how municipalities manage their system. In respect to that, a water financial plan is mandatory for municipal water systems to renew a drinking water license. One of the key intentions of the regulation itself is to ensure that there's a lot more public transparency and long-term planning for sustainability of the municipal drinking water system. So making sure the municipalities are really looking at the system and looking at their capital expenditures and their operating costs over the longer term, so not just through your in-year capital and operating budget requirements. So one of the key things of the financial plan itself, it has to include 3 financial statements. What we call is one, a statement of operation, the second one being a statement of financial position, and the third being a statement of cash flow. The regulation requires that the plans cover a planning period of at least 6 years. It has to be approved by council. Subsequent to the approval, it gets submitted to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and then it has to be made publicly available. The financial plan itself is a pretty technical document in the context of it being very much put in a format prescribed in the accounting standards. So the terminology and what you see in there is very much more of a technical document that supports kind of the information, the forecast that the city already prepares on a regular basis. So one of the key objectives here and overarching assumptions that we've used in the plan, one, the plan itself is a tool for decision-making and analysis. It's good that it's done and you can review the actual projections contained within the water financial plan and review that in the context of your actual expenditures and revenues on an annual basis. Certainly, aside from it being a planning tool, it is a regulatory compliance and requirement. So it has to be done in order to maintain your drinking water license and in order to renew your license as part of that application process. One of the things that's outlined in that regulation is that it is a living document. So certainly if anything changes or you want to make adjustments to the financial plan, it's more than welcome and you're allowed to do so during that intervening period. The plan itself that we prepared, we tried to utilize as much information as possible and all of your existing assumptions and kind of plans itself. So looking at your long-term capital funding policy, looking at your 2024 asset management plan, recent budgets, both 2025 and some of the draft budgets that we were working with, which I believe is being presented subsequent to this presentation. And then kind of using that information to kind of forecast the way the system is going to grow or change over that planning period. We've used some recent inflationary trends, information around your debenture information in order to populate those projections. So just kind of one of the key inputs into this is really looking at how the municipality looks at managing your capital infrastructure. We have a total capital program of about $122 million from the 2025 to 2034 period, of which works out to be about $12.2 million each year. And obviously the capital plan kind of has some peaks and valleys within it, but generally pretty consistent from a year-to-year basis over that planning horizon. The program itself includes a number of key projects, whether it's kind of water main rehabilitation works, infrastructure upgrades, extensions, your drive trunks, Lakeshore Drive. So there's certainly both linear and plant-related infrastructure requirements built within the capital program that we've included and embedded within the water financial plan itself. So kind of going through now some of the statement components, and the first one being the statement of operations is a requirement here of the OREG 45307. We have our projection of statement of operations. We have on the red bar being our total revenues that we're projecting year over year through to 2034. And then we also have our total operating expenditures of the system in the green. And then we have kind of a toggle of our annual surplus that's being achieved year over year. One of the things I would just want to note that this is one of the statements that's prepared kind of under the tangible capital asset and your PSAP requirements, so it is more of the accounting statement. This includes your operating costs, but doesn't really include any of those capital projects yet that we just spoke about on the previous slide. It does include the annual amortization of your capital, but not necessarily the fulfillment of your $12 million in capital projects each year. So we are showing an annual surplus year over year. And that surplus effectively indicates that the municipality has available funds to start to pay for some of those capital costs, pay for your principal on debt, and transfers to replenish and build that reserve fund over the longer term period. And we'll show you what that looks like on the next couple of slides. The second kind of statement here is our statement of financial position. The financial assets are shown on the red bar, and your financial liabilities are shown on the green bar. When we talk about financial assets, that's really looking at your cash that's available on hand, your cash and cash equivalents. Your financial liabilities, in the technical terms here, we're looking at what are the liabilities, your outstanding principal that's on that system. And we have our gold line tracking how those financial positions are going to change, and we're showing a net financial asset or liability position over the period, it does come positive again by 2034. What effectively that means is that the municipality is continuing to take on some debt in accordance with your debt management policy. But as that debt's being incurred, we are doing have outstanding principal. So we do have a bit of a kind of liability position, but we are growing our tangible capital assets. So we see that our accumulated surplus in terms of our tangible capital asset database, our capital is growing over that planning horizon. So all that means is that some of our revenues that we're collecting are going to be effectively being paid or used towards paying some of that debt and those debt obligations, which that type of picture isn't uncommon in other municipalities. So just to kind of put a precursor to that. What we have on the next slide is a really important one, because this kind of summarizes your statement of cash flow and the way the cash and the revenues, both on the coming inside on the revenue side, and then your cash position of what's actually going out in terms of your payments, and how does that mean in terms of our ending reserve fund balance. So we have our cash receipts on the red bar. So that's all the revenue that's coming in, your rate revenues, whether you have grant money, proceeds from debt, some of your miscellaneous revenues that are coming in, whether it's connection charges and so on, that's all captured under your red bar. Your cash payments, so what's being outlaid in order to fund your operations. We have our operating costs, we have our acquisition of our capital assets, and now we also have those debt payments that we're seeing from all the debenture proceeds that we received. So those are going to be your green bars there. And then what we have is our toggling of our ending cash balance, because that's our cash and cash equivalent. So that's going to be our reserve funds over that planning horizon. And we see that our gold line really tracks at a very similar level over the next 5 to 7 years. So there's not too much material difference in our reserve funds. And we do start to see the reserves accumulate kind of towards the end or the latter end of the period. But our reserve funds do maintain a positive position throughout that 2034 period. And that means that the municipality has sufficient funds to carry out your system costs, operating and capital, as well as pay for your debt, while also making sure that we're putting some money away and making sure there's money available in reserve in case something does come up that isn't captured in our long-term capital plan. And that's obviously quite critical. You know, you manage a system well over $600 million just on the water system alone. So having some buffer in your reserve funds is quite important in itself. So that kind of concludes really some of the technical side of the reporting components here. Based on that, the water system is financially sustainable for both the short and longer term, based on some of those current assumptions, recognizing there's going to be increasing costs and there's going to be increasing rate requirements in order to substantiate those revenues that we're realizing in order to pay for our system expenditures. The financial plan is a living document. So again, these are projections as of the point in time, and it will continue to require updates or improvements as new information comes along. And certainly you will be required to at least formally update this plan at the 5-year time in order to kind of put it forward again for your next drinking water license renewal application. And then certainly I think one of the concluding kind of remarks here is that council recommend to pass the necessary resolutions as outlined in the report and as outlined by the chair as kind of at the start of the meeting of what's required here, and then following that it be made publicly available to anyone who asks for it. So that does conclude the presentation that I have, and I think both Laura and I are happy to answer any questions council or committee might have.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thanks for your presentation this evening. Certainly appreciate it. Is this a new report, or was there one previously 8 years ago, 10 years ago that was required?
Through the Mayor, that's a good question. This is a report new from today's standpoint, but it was required and it did occur 5 years ago, and then the first one being probably 5 years before that. So there's been a couple of reports over the last decade.
So there's been a couple of reports on this. And Laura, maybe for your question on this, did we compare what we projected against those previous reports? Do you know?
Was that a part of the review?
There wasn't any, sorry, maybe I can answer some of that. Through the kind of looking at the last projections, it does look like there was some deviation in terms of the rates that were set versus the rates that were kind of calculated during those reports. But we didn't do a deep dive into determining what the expenditure requirements or the contribution to reserve funds, what those balances look like versus the the 5-year report in this one. And that could be done again at any time over.
And so we
preceding
need
months.
to renew this once again in 5 years?
Correct.
Okay,
The last report was done in 2020.
2020, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair Mitchell. Mayor Chirico asked my first question, but just when it comes to the water financial plan, so could it be changed or updated within that 5-year period between our next renewal date?
Through the mayor, yes, you can update that plan over the 5-year period. It's required as part of your license renewal application, but they are living documents, and should anything change within the plan that warrants an update, like I said, you can certainly do the update.
Thank you, Chair, and I do have 2 more questions. Just to confirm, the term accumulated surplus, does that translate into cash on hand or something else?
Through the mayor, the term accumulated surplus from the accounting perspective here, that really relates to your change in your tangible capital assets based on historical value and plus your net financial position over the period. So the $180-some odd million that we showed does not translate into cash on hand. It's a number significantly less than that for cash on hand.
Perfect. And then just one final question. Does the net financial liability position mean that the city does not have cash funds available to operate the water system and provide water services?
Through the mayor, good question. So the net financial position, the liability position does not mean that. You do have sufficient funds to operate the system. That just translates into some of the principal that's owing on the system, and the cash available on hand kind of puts it into a liability, but you have funds on hand in order to fund your operations, both as shown in the statement of operations as well as your statement of cash flow.
Councilor Lynch?
Thank you, and yeah, thank you for the presentation. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what part of this plan gives you the most confidence in our long-term financial stability?
It's a good question. I actually, from when I reviewed the plan and did some of the work, I was actually quite impressed with some of the kind of foresight on your capital program. We usually see when we do these types of plans at year 5 or year 6, the capital program really starts to fall off, or fall off cliff, lack of a better word, just because the knowledge isn't there, but you do have a capital plan that's built out, so you do have quite a bit of information to know when your capital expenditures are going to be, and looks like you're planning for it. And then with that, your reserve funds are staying at a fairly stable position over the period, but I do know that there is some work to look at what those reserve fund policies are and how those need to be managed over the longer term in context to managing your safe, sustainable system and even capital projects that might lie outside that 10-year plan horizon.
Okay. And so follow up, and so you believe that maintaining a stable reserve balance is very important, obviously, to maintain the health of our water system long term?
So through the mayor, I would certainly want to see it at least maintain it at its existing level, but relative to how much they grow, that is obviously a decision of council and staff as to how much you want to be putting away to save for the future repair and replacement of your infrastructure, while also balancing kind of affordability considerations, while also making sure that you're fulfilling your long-term financial strategy itself.
Thank you.
Councilor Malala?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. In regards to government funding, it was forecasted that we would receive government funding to 2025, 2027, 2028, and then there was a gap before 2033 and 2034, and I'm just wondering for some insight there about why it's not anticipated between 2029 and 2032.
So through the mayor, we have some money allocated for more consistent CCBF allocation or OSIF allocations that are tied to your capital program, but some of the bigger ticket grant items from your Hughes funding or your other grant funding sources that are tied to specific projects we've included in. But certainly, if you were successful in other grants, that doesn't preclude you from applying it to other projects within those periods that we don't show any grant funding. So we only try to show it to where there's actually a capital funding source tied to it.
Thank you. I have another question through you, Chair, if that's okay. This is a bit similar to Deputy Mayor Horsfield's question, but in regards to the projected revenues total, 15.1 million against expenses of 9.8 million, producing an expected surplus of 5.3 million. I understand that not all of that money would be cash on hand, but I'm just wondering how much of it would be available for capital. I know it's a very specific question.
So the money or the cash and cash equivalents that are on hand can be available for capital, but we always stress that you do want to have some sort of contingency for your operating budget variances as well. And again, that kind of also goes back to perhaps some of the guiding principles of your policy, where some municipalities do have even if it's contained within one reserve fund, you might want to have some parameters around making sure that we've got 3 to 6 months operating budget in reserve funds, and then the balance can be used for capital, and vice versa. If you have a capital target, how you manage that. So the money is there and you can use it, but we always want to caution, if you draw upon it all, then if there's a kind of a very dry or wet year on the books and consumption, that could influence your revenues, and then now you're kind of going to be in effectively in a deficit position. So you just kind of have to toggle both and manage them.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor King?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report. I gather the financial plan is really part and parcel of the requirement under the Ontario regulations as far as the viability of the water system. I gather that's why we're doing it, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So at this point, are there any changes that council could make that would actually jeopardize the approval at the provincial level?
Maybe just to follow up with what type of changes in terms of the projections or changes on the budget?
I'll open it up. You tell me. You're the expert at it.
So, I mean, from a jeopardizing from an approval standpoint, I mean, the province requires you to prepare a plan, and that plan should be submitted. Now, if next year or the plan changes and council makes adjustments to the policies or the operating or capital budgets change, like things do change, and that's why they are living documents. But we would certainly recommend that a plan be submitted as part of license renewal to make sure that that step is cleared, and then should any changes kind of follow to that, you can always update the plan or keep it on the books for kind of 2 or 3 years' time when further updates or further subsequent changes happen.
So really the reality here is that we have to have some sort of a plan. It has to be approved by the province, and there's really no changes that council can make at this particular point. Is that my understanding of what we're doing here?
To this particular plan, should council want to make changes, we can take that back. But like I said, there is a requirement and a deadline, I guess, per se, that this plan has to be submitted for. And then that can always be taken into consideration to an amendment or an update to the water financial plan.
And I noticed actually the report talked about ongoing changes that could take place over the life of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
Do those changes go back to the province for approval? Who approves those changes?
It doesn't necessarily go back to the province for approval. I mean, if you do make changes during the intervening period, you could resubmit it to the province and let them know that there's been an update to the water financial plan. And then they will likely just keep that on the record for the city's kind of license renewal application. And then I would kind of make sure that was brought forward again during your next 5-year review to make sure that there's been an update to that plan in the intervening time.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Lowry?
Thank you, Chair. Are these ever audited, these plans, like by the province? Do they ever look in any of the details to see if, you're saying what you're saying is actually true?
Through the mayor, I haven't personally seen any audits to them. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I haven't seen any questions to the plans. I do know, obviously, there are projections, there are municipalities' efforts at the information using, that best used information at the available time of the study, and those are, as long as you've made those assumptions and statements within the plan, those get put forward, but haven't seen any feedback on any of the ones that we've done.
And a follow-up on that. So if your projections were somewhat grossly overestimated or underestimated, is it municipality's responsibility to report those to the province?
Through the mayor, I don't think there's any formal obligation to do so, but certainly if there's material changes in the projections, you as the municipality are going to look at the plan and want to understand why those variances did occur, and for better or for worse. Maybe you've gotten revenues that we didn't anticipate, there was more growth, there was something that occurred that changed the course of the financial plan. And that's why we always consider them to be living documents, because things do happen, and you would want to understand that from a service delivery standpoint, what those cost changes are, and either how do we improve upon them, or now where we're going to utilize that money to kind of carry out capital that maybe we weren't able to do so under the previous iteration or any of the circumstances.
One more question. So would it be your advice to visit this a little more regularly than every 5 years?
It's a tough question because I know municipal staff have a lot on their plates, always on the go. I encourage staff to review the plan in the context of comparing it to your actuals and comparing it, kind of compare it against what's in the plan versus what's happening on the ground. As a regular kind of state of practice, whether that actually translates into a formal report and update and going through the exercise, because that does take time and resources, that might be another question. You have to test that against how much of a variance are we seeing from what we actually projected.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bain?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So there are municipalities that submit these plans, and are you aware of any that have ever been rejected and said from the province is that, it's not, they've hired Hempson, they've hired somebody else, you've done a plan, you've sent it away, and they are not they don't have the financial wherewithal to meet the plan? Are those, Hempson, I'm sure, never would have had drafted that plan. But when they're submitted, are you aware of any that are rejected by the province?
Through the mayor, I have not seen any that have gotten rejected. None that I'm aware of, at least. Again, can't say that it hasn't happened, but I've never heard of it yet.
But you're aware that there are lots of municipalities in Ontario that especially small ones, struggle
Yes.
With the size of the water system and the cost of running a water system, and they get licensed and they get
That's right.
approvals by the ministry every 5 years.
That's correct.
So this is an exercise.
Yeah, absolutely, it's an exercise. This is one of the submission requirements to your license renewal application. This isn't the only submission requirement, yeah.
And there's other regulatory responsibilities that we have for our safe drinking water that we file annually.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Gardner?
Thanks, Chair. Just one quick question, Andrew, on page 8, the chart with water rates. I just wondered, what's the blip in 2027? Why does it increase substantially that particular year?
So through the mayor, yeah, the projection of the utility rates, there's the increase just kind of timing with some of the increased capital or increased nature of the debt that's coming online. And then it kind of smooths out. But in practice, you might obviously be looking at kind of smoothing out those increases or those requirements year over year. But just from a purely mathematical perspective, there's just kind of the peaks and valleys of what might occur.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Inch?
May I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Thank you. So you mentioned something about what would happen if, say, there was a low rate year, right? So in terms of getting enough revenues to cover the cost of the system. I didn't hear it, and maybe it's in there and I missed it, but are we using development charges at all to cover any of this?
So through the mayor, we are including development charge revenues in here to fund the share or portions of growth-related capital costs. And they're considered as part of the deferred revenues in the statements.
Okay. And I'm just thinking from a green perspective in terms of, we do encourage people to conserve, yet we're in a kind of a tight spot here because, of course, we also need the revenue. Are any other communities you're aware of, are they doing anything differently than we are that you might recommend we could introduce in terms of trying to raise more revenue?
So through the mayor, I mean, there's not, unfortunately, not a whole lot of silver bullets from municipality has in terms of generating revenues to cover costs. Your utility rates are your primary source here to cover the utility rate funded services. I mean, the only kind of item that I would say, just kind of the context in North Bay and your development charges are set below the maximum permissible rates. And so should, through your next review, look to increase those DCs to cover a greater share of your capital program, that could certainly help alleviate some of the pressures that we're seeing on the kind of utility rates to fund that share of capital. But that's, you know, you certainly apply all your resources to get as much grant money as you can. And then aside from grants and DCs and utility rates, that is, those are the sources.
And reserves, right? As well?
Yeah, well, the reserves are a function of the utility rates, but yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
Okay, you're good? Anybody else? Councillor Malott?
Thanks. I just have a follow-up question to that. I know in the report, it was saying that from 2027 to 2034, we can use perhaps approximately 60% of the prior year balance of deferred development charges on eligible capital projects. And I was just wondering, why was the 60% chosen? Is that kind of best practice with other municipalities?
So through the mayor, that's an excellent question to point out. There's been some recent changes to the Development Charges Act requiring municipalities to spend or allocate at least 60% of their money each year. So part of that rationale is that that money that you're carrying forward at least 60% into your capital budgeting exercises. Certainly you can allocate more, but it has to be that 60% at minimum. No problem.
Is that it for questions? Okay, so at this time, I'd like to thank both of you for giving an excellent presentation, answering questions, and walking us through the 2025 to 2034 Water Financial Plan. And further, I'd like to now read the draft recommendation and poll the committee. I'd also ask for a recorded vote, please. So the recommendation is that, 1, council approve the 2025 to 2034 Water Financial Plan in accordance with Ontario Regulation 45307, subsection 3.1, paragraph 1, and acknowledges that the water system is financially viable. 2, the 2025 to 2034 Water Financial Plan be made available for public review at the City Clerk's office during regular office hours and on the city's website, and a public notice regarding the financial plan's availability be posted in accordance with Ontario Regulation 453-07, subsection 3.1, paragraph 5. And 3, that the 2025 to 2034 Water Financial Plan be submitted to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing in accordance with the Ontario Regulation 453-07, subsection 3.1, paragraph 6, and that a copy of this resolution and a copy of the 2025 to 2034 Water Financial Plan be submitted to the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks in accordance with the Safe Drinking Water Act 2002, subsection 32.5, subsection 2II. Councillor Horsfield? Oh, you do that, record a vote? Sorry.
So the recorded vote will only be to bring the committee report forward to council. At the council meeting on November 25th, the entire resolution will be read. So there's a recorded vote upon the request of Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Mitchell?
Yes.
Councillor King?
I agree.
Councillor Lowry? Yes. Councillor Inch?
Yes.
Councillor Malott?
Yes.
Councillor Bain?
Yes.
Councillor Gardner?
Yes.
Councillor Horsfield?
Yes.
Mayor Churko?
Yes.
The matter will be brought forward.
Okay, that completes the business of infrastructure and operations for this evening. I will turn the meeting back over to you, Your Worship.
Thanks very much, Chair Mitchell. And thank you very much for your presentation this evening. Next on, we're heading into budget. And we're turning it over to General Government and Deputy Mayor Horsfield, Budget Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Chirko. This evening, we will be reviewing the 2026 water and wastewater budget. I'd now like to invite City CAO John Severino, Laura Boissonneau, and Shannon Saucier to come forward to present. John will provide an introduction to the 2026 budget. Laura will then go into providing an overview of the water and wastewater budget specifically. Shannon will follow up with the water and wastewater reserves. And then we will move into discussing the rates, and there will be an opportunity for council to ask questions after the presentation. So I'll now turn it over to John to kick us off.
Evening, Madam Chair, Mayor, and Council. Tonight marks the kickoff of the city's 2026 budget discussions, beginning with the water and wastewater budget. This will be the fourth and final budget of this council's term, providing an opportunity to look at the progress made over the past 3 budgets before turning our focus to the year ahead. Throughout this term, council has provided consistent direction in balancing costs, sustainability, investment in our water systems, to safely and efficiently meet the community's needs when it comes to water and wastewater operations. And of course, we just heard from Hemson how we are progressing. Rate structure. Our water and water systems are fully rate supported, meaning they are funded primarily through the water and wastewater rate revenues. The water and wastewater operating budget is not funded by property taxes. This term has included an important adjustment to the rate structure. At the start of the term, the rate was evenly split 50-50 between fixed and variable portions. This structure council approved a gradual shift towards a 40% fixed and 60% variable rate structure. This structure better aligns costs with actual water use, supports conservation, promotes fairness, and maintains the financial stability needed to operate the system. As previously directed by council, the 40-60 structure is recommended to continue in 2026. From an infrastructure investment perspective, the city has made significant investments to strengthen the system's reliability and extend the life of the assets. More than half of the annual increases during this past term have funded capital improvements. This includes ongoing upgrades to both the water and wastewater treatment plants, ensuring it continues to meet environmental and regulatory standards, as well as linear infrastructure investments, such as investments in the system as part of the widening of McCune Avenue, and most recently, the work underway as part of the Seymour Street reconstruction, just to name a couple, and you see some pictures in front of you. The city has also expanded the use of trenchless technologies, such as cured-in-place piping in several areas, which is a cost-effective and minimally disruptive method of rehabilitating underground mains without full excavations. For example, water distribution improvements along Trout Lake Road last summer and in the vicinity of Northgate Mall. The proposed 2026 budget continues this focus, recommending continued investment in key infrastructure to support the long-term system sustainability. From a comparability perspective, we continue to deliver high-quality water and wastewater services at rates that remain well below average. According to the latest available BMA municipal study in 2024, the North Bay household paid about 20% less than the Northern Ontario average and 13% below the provincial average for the combined water and wastewater service. This reinforces that even with continued infrastructure investment, North Bay's rates remain comparable across Ontario. Turning to the 2026 budget, The proposed gross water and wastewater budget is $31.1 million, with $28.99 funded through the rates. This represents a 5.27 overall increase in rate revenue from 2025. The breakdown is 7.12 increase to the water rate revenue, which is consistent with what we heard earlier this evening from Hemson, and 3.42 for the wastewater. It is recommended that the 40% fixed and 60% variable rate remains in place for 2026, and that's how our budget is being presented. For an average residential user, and the average users are between 14 and 20 cubic meters per month, the annual impact is an increase of $43 to $50, which works out to between $3.58 to $4.18 per month. The resulting average total monthly bill would be $99.27 to $121.75, depending on people's consumption. These impacts reflect the recommended budget. At the same time, we've also included alternative options, including reserves to reduce the impacts, also provided for Council's consideration. I will now transition over to Laura, who will look at the city's 2026 water and wastewater operating budget, reserves, and rates.
Pleased to present the city's 2026 water and wastewater operating budget. Getting this package to council has been no small feat, and I just want to take a moment to express my sincere appreciation to John Severino for his guidance, Shannon Saucier for her support and thoughtful input, the communications department, Gordon Heather for their vision and their technical support, and finally the finance department staff, including Sarah Gage, Janice Marcel, and Dan Robertson, for their commitment to meeting deadlines and delivering a comprehensive package for you here today. It's been a lot of work to get this package here, and I wanted to make those comments. We have a quick agenda here to show you that we're going to discuss the water and the wastewater operating budget overview. Then we're going to be going into a discussion on water and wastewater reserves and the projected balances, and then we'll discuss the water and the wastewater calculated rates, and then we'll open it to council discussion. Budgeting evolves into four components. You need to understand your operational requirements, your infrastructure needs, your growth initiatives, and your provincial legislation. So those are the four main components of when you prepare a budget. Within your budget, we have to reflect the full cost recovery, and that includes your operating costs, your capital costs, and your debt servicing costs. The primary sources of funding are your rate revenues, but you do also have user fees, grants, and reserves. And like user fees are your service contracts or your water turn off and turn on. Your grants would be your provincial and federal programs, that like your summer student programming. And then we have been using reserves to stabilize or to fund emergencies. Primary operating expenses include your capital levy, so your pay-go, personnel expenses, utilities for sure and insurance, materials including chemicals, and internal transfers, which is the corporate support that helps support the water system to get everything that we need. Considerations that staff take when they're actually developing their budgets. There's a lot of considerations. It's not like we're just opening up our budget and looking at a line item and adding a number. There's so many considerations, including your aging infrastructure and your infrastructure gap, growth, what's growth going to be in the next year or two, climate change, rising costs, and your ancillary revenues. Like you want to try to find revenues outside of the rates if possible. Water conservation, where we can potentially find it. Improvements for energy efficiency, we're always trying to consider that. Reduce water loss and infiltration. Promote asset management programs, because that's going to help us drive proper operating budgets if we understand that. And finally, our water meter maintenance and upgrades, because we have to have a good metered system and a reliable metered system if we're going to be billing properly. Corp 2025-84 presents the water and the wastewater budget for 2026. There's no service level changes presented in this budget. It includes 3 options for council's consideration. The 5.27%, which is the recommended option, but there's also an additional option of 4%, which is using an additional $350,000 of reserves, or a choice of 6.28%, which is reducing the capital reserve allowance that we had put in the proposed plan. This is just a snippet of your net operating budget summary. The 4.3 million for wastewater and the 4.7 for water activities are your operating expenditures less your ancillary revenues. So that is the bare amount that you need to get from your water bills on an annual basis. This chart is to give you an overview of the 31 million of operating expenses. So you can clearly see from this chart that 51% of your gross operating expenses is capital investment. You have goods and services, your personnel, and internal transfers making up the balance. But so your bill that you get on a monthly basis, half of it is covering your capital infrastructure needs and half of it is covering your operational requirements. This is just to further demonstrate that of the 5.27% that we're recommending tonight, it's a $1.4 million increase, and that is made up of $360,000 from personnel costs, $285,000 from goods and services, $240,000 from internal transfers, but this is the large one. It's $824,000 from your capital investment. So basically, 3% of your 5.27% increase is related to capital investments. Over the course of the year, we've had public engagement initiatives. We had the 2026 budget email. We've had an asset management engagement survey that was closed on July 31st. We had a budget engagement survey that closed on November 12th. We had a booth at the farmers market in September, and we also have the public meeting coming up on, I believe it's November 26th. Feedback from the two budgeting, the budget survey and the asset management survey outlined PFAS remediation is a concern. The asset management plan, they want us to focus on a comprehensive plan, and that maintenance and project selection ensure that we have sound processes in place to for our selection for maintenance and infrastructure projects. So I'll turn it over to Shannon for the reserve portion.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, members of council. The city has a reserve policy that was reviewed as part of the 2023 Long-Term Financial Plan Committee. Through that policy, the policy determines how reserves are established, what reserves earn interest, what it can be used for, and then various roles and responsibilities between council and staff members. Through that policy, it also outlines reporting requirements, and so there also was a request to bring forward a comprehensive report that included all of the city's reserve balances. So the report was presenting the reserve balances as at December 31st of 2024 to coincide with the city's most recent year end, but we have also rolled it forward given the time of the year that we are now in to reflect September 30th balances with projections to year end. So tonight's conversation, tonight's conversation will focus on the water and wastewater portion of the reserves, and then we will revisit the reserves as part of the January meetings for the capital and tax levy funded reserves. Reserves are a critical component of a municipality's long-term financial plan. They are a tool that provides long-term sustainability, operational flexibility for uncertain events, and ensures service continuity. Overall, the city has two broad categories of reserve funds. Discretionary reserves are established at the discretion of council for purposes in which they have authority to spend money and can be used for future expenditures, and there is the ability to allocate a portion of the current year's funding for those future expenses. Obligatory reserves tie to statutory requirements, such as the Development Charges Act requires that we maintain monies collected in a specific reserve and allocated interest, and can only be spent for the purposes in which the funds were either collected or provided to us. Our funding sources like OCIF and gas tax monies are also considered obligatory and are tied to funding agreements. So first start off by just walking through an overview of the city's water and wastewater reserve balances and explaining a bit of the purpose, the scheduled commitments, and the projected balance and how that compares to the policy targets. So the first category is discretionary water and wastewater capital reserve funds. These funds were created to help support the capital projects separated by water and sanitary sewer projects. So as the city has quite a number of water and wastewater assets and a capital funding program every year, it's not unusual to have some fluctuations where some projects come in above or below budget. So when those projects close, these are the reserves that council provides authority to close them out to. So in terms of the water systems completed capital, the balance at the end of December was $6 million. At September 30th, it's $6.2 million. And then there's an approved operating commitment of $100,000. That is the low flow toilet rebate program that has been set aside to fund that particular initiative. So the ending balance is just over $6.1 million. In regards to the sanitary sewer completed capital, the balance at the end of the year was approximately $5.8 million. In September, the balance was $6 million. And it's important to note that our capital our capital reserves, in accordance with our policy, earn interest. So some of the changes between December and September will be interest allocated to it. And then there is a 2025 capital approved commitment of $484,000, which is capital projects that were allocated funding from this reserve as part of the 2025 capital budget program. So those monies are put aside in this reserve, but they do not come out until the corresponding expenditures have been completed. So the ending balance was $5.6 million. And then the last reserve in this category is for the wastewater treatment plant membrane replacement. So several years ago, there was funds set aside in a reserve to help support the membrane replacement project when it came to be required. And so in the most recent capital budget, the majority of those funds were allocated to that project as it's currently in progress. There is a small balance that's projected to be remaining, which is related to interest that it's earned. So through the capital variance reporting, we would look to allocate that to the project because it was not fully funded from a reserve source. So overall, the target as per the city's current policy is that our capital reserve should be 40% of our capital funding policy expenditure limit. And the policy expenditure limit is the capital levy and the debt that goes towards the capital project each year. So in the case of the 2025 target, that equates to $6 million. So based on that, our actual reserve balances are approximately 78% of the current capital funding policy limit, or $11.8 million, which is above the policy target. The next section of reserves refers to the water and wastewater stabilization reserve funds. So these are funds, as we heard earlier, that we operate a metered system. And so as much as we do our best to project consumption patterns, there can be variations from year to year depending upon the weather conditions and actual consumption patterns. So these reserves are typically used for the operating budget and help fund any surpluses or deficits that are experienced over the years. In the 2025 operating approved commitments column, the water operating budget is showing a $37,000 reduction, whereas the sanitary sewer is showing an increase of $136,000. Those numbers correspond to the September 30th variance projection that was tabled to council recently. So in the 25 budget, there was a plan to use, or approval, sorry, to use $825,000 in reserve funds. Based on the projected activities as they have been occurring this year, we're only set to use $37,000 or $38,000 in water, and we're actually going to be able to put funds into the sanitary sewer operating reserve. However, that being said, when you look at the total balances, so again, on a combined basis, there was $2.5 million at the end of December, the same balance in September, and then once we add in the forecasted September position, we will be at just over $2.5 million. In that category, we're below our target. So the policy target for stabilization reserves says that we should have 10 to 15% of our total operating budget expenditures, which would be a range of 2.9 to 4.4 million. So we're just below that target. And then in the next few slides, I will, once I go through the last category, we'll be walking through some options to rebalance or align the reserve balances with the policy targets, as well as showing how the 2026 planned or recommended phase-out plan of reserves will impact these balances. So the final category is regarding discretionary water and wastewater operating reserves that have been put aside for specific purposes. So the first reserve in this category is called the water treatment surcharge. This reserve was created a number of years ago, and it was set up to fund the principal and interest payments on the long-term loan that was taken out when the water treatment plant was constructed. So the reserves in this category do not have a specific target for the whole pool like we just saw when it came to the capital and the stabilization. You have to look at each one of these reserves for its own merits and the purpose for which it was put aside. So just sticking with the water treatment surcharge balance for now, the principal and interest, we only have 2 years left on the water treatment loan. So those payments are known. So usually when we do our budgeting each year, we try to look at the specific purpose reserves and make sure that they're in line with the reason that they were set up in the first place. So when we're pulling together this year's budget and comparing the reserve balance of just over 1.2 million to the remaining principal and interest payments, it was noted that the remaining principal and interest payments are only $928,000 compared to the reserve balance of 1.2 million. So part of our recommendation through this presentation and as part of the budget approval is to transfer the excess, so $317,746 out of this reserve and into the water stabilization reserve fund. And that will help with the target that was established for that particular reserve. The other two reserves in this category are the capital financing for water and capital financing for sewer. So these reserves were established, again, several years ago when there were differences and timing differences between when we planned to go out for debt on our capital projects and when we actually took out that debt. So the funds that we budgeted for principal that we didn't end up needing in that particular year would be put in these two reserves. And then when we did issue the debt, we would pull it out and it would form part of our long-term capital funding plan to help ensure that we still have sufficient funds going to the capital budget. In the 25 operating approved commitment column for those particular reserves, that the 234,000 for water and the 440 for sewer represents the surplus, if you will, for the principal payments in 2025, that through the September variance report, it was identified that those monies would be recommended to go to these reserves. Because not all of the debt was issued this year, so that when it is issued in future years, it can be withdrawn. So the total balance in this category was 2.5 million at December, and with the suggested September 30th transfers, we would be at 2.7 in total. However, keeping in mind there is a recommendation to bring the water treatment reserve in line with the intended purpose for which it was established. So the next slide is an analysis of the operating stabilization reserve funds. The first row is the balances that we just reviewed a few minutes ago in terms of the projected year-end balances. So those balances include the forecasted September 30th surplus or deficit positions from an operational standpoint. Then the next section is replenishment options to align these reserves with the target. So as I had mentioned a few minutes ago, on the operating side, these reserves are currently below the city's policy target. So a few options is the first amount is 800,000 in total. That is coming from capital projects that we have reviewed as part of planning for our 10-year capital plan that are set to close at the end of the year that are looking to have surpluses on a combined basis. So these are approximate dollars based on what we believe the projects will end at and will close at. The next line was the water treatment surcharge excess over and above the principal and interest requirements that we have. So the recommendation would be to move that from the water treatment surcharge into the water operating stabilization reserve fund. The next line is entitled 2025 WSIB refunds. So as part of last year's budget process, it was identified that the city was in receipt of a rebate for WSIB premiums. That has also come true again this year. And so the recommendation that was being made through the operating budget variance was to put the rebates into the corresponding water and wastewater operating reserves to help with the phase-out plan of the reserve usage in the operating budget. So the combined WSIB refund balance is just under $264,000. And then the last item in that section is 2025 transfer from capital reserves. So the recommendation currently is that when we look at our policy targets, our capital reserves are over their target and our operating reserves are below their target. The primary funding source for the water and wastewater capital budget is funding from the water rates and the wastewater rates on the bills. So this reallocation, if you will, is still putting the money back to the source in which it came from, because it was originally collected from the bills, was transferred over to fund the capital projects. Those capital projects closed at surpluses over the years, and now those capital reserves are above their target, so we're just looking to realign it so that we're within our policy targets, both on operating and on capital. So then it brings a subtotal. That then brings the reserve balance to 5.2 million, which is above the policy target. However, as part of the budget planning and the phase-out plan that was identified in the 2026 capital budget, there is a recommended use of $825,000 in combined operating and water or wastewater reserves, and then a 3-year phase-out plan. So by transferring in the balances identified above to the 5.2, it then allows to ensure that there are sufficient funds to fund the phase-out plan and then still at the end of it be within the policy target. So after 2029, then we wouldn't be using any reserves to fund the operating in 2030, and all else being equal, the projected reserve balances would be about 3.2 million, and that would be in the lower middle range of our current target, which is 2.9 to 4.4 million. It's just as an important note that the target will change as our budgets change, but based on 2025 target, we would be in the middle of that target. The next slide is a similar analysis, but with respect to the capital reserves funds. So again, the first row is the balances projected to the end of the year. And then the next line is transferring out of these reserves and into the water reserves, as I just previously had mentioned. The various capital projects, 2026 to 2035, that represents our 10-year capital plan and the planned use or forecasted use of completed capital reserves to help fund those projects. So because we have council approving capital budgets on a 1 year at a time, but we do a 10-year forecast, those balances did not form part of what we referred to as formal commitments in the previous slides, but they are, from a planning perspective, funds that we have purposes for and have allocated them to projects. So we wanted to make sure that that wasn't lost in this analysis. And then as part of the 2026 budget recommendation of the 5.27%, the recommendation was to maintain the use for 26 of 825 in operating reserve funds and to add $280,705 from the completed capital reserves. The reason for this was, as Laura had mentioned a few minutes ago, a significant portion of the expenditures in the water and wastewater budget relate to capital. And it has been recognized and has been talked about in the past that once we update our asset management plan, which is coming to council within the next couple of weeks, that it would be prudent to go back and revisit our long-term capital funding policy as well as our reserve policy and making sure that they're all aligned. So because the capital reserves are above our policy targets right now, and we know that about half of about 2.99% of the 5.27% is coming from capital, to allow us to kind of find a middle ground until we have time to go and revisit those policies without right now cutting the funding to the capital budget. We thought that we would recommend using some of the reserves with a phase-out plan that still aligns the ending balance within the policy target, and it provides some relief this year with a phase-out plan and allowing that policy to be reviewed in the new year. So that $280,000 is part of the 5.27% recommendation to council. So again, similar to operating, we've recommended a 3-year phase-out plan after the current year's budget. So this slide is comparing the 2025 phase-out plan with the 2026 phase-out plan. So in 2025, for 25's budget, we had used $825,000 in reserve funds. And then for 26, we were going to use 75% of that, and then 50% and 25% until we were down to completely phasing out of it. Because we have reviewed our reserve balances and we had receipt of the WSIB rebates as well in 25 as we did in 24, we had recommended to hold the 26 at 825 and then proceed with the 75% phase out in 27, 50% in 28, and so on. And then we had also introduced the capital. So this shows both the operating and the capital phase-out proposed plan that forms part of the 2026 recommended budget. I also wanted to just remind or make note that although the planned and the approved use was $825,000 in reserves for 2025, based on our forecast, we're not expecting to use that. We're using about $37,000, as I mentioned, in water, and then putting money into reserves on the sanitary sewer side. So the next slide is showing what the planned or approved budget use of reserves has been, but now splitting it between water and wastewater, and then comparing it to what we have actually used. So there are fluctuations in the system, which can be from a number of factors, such as personnel vacancies to water consumptions, and if we had a dry summer versus a wet summer. So although we have planned to use reserves in a number of these years, the actual reserve usage has not always been as high as what we had planned. And then just to summarize the reserve section, I know that was quite a lot of information. In terms of the 2026 operating budget, at the will of council, if this was the approved recommendation, that the direction would include the approval to transfer the $317,746 from the water treatment plant reserve to the water operating reserve, to transfer $1 million from the water capital to the water operating reserve, and then to transfer $300,000 from the wastewater capital to the wastewater operating reserve. And then council will have the decision in terms of the use of reserves on the operating side, whether that's 825 or a different amount, and similarly on the capital reserve, whether we use the 280 or not. And just moving forward, I had briefly mentioned about the need in 2026 to review our policies once the asset management plan is finalized and comes before council. I think that it would be prudent to review both the reserve policy, the long-term capital funding policy, to make sure that they don't just each stand alone. Once the asset management plan's updated, that they do tie together. And that we would also identify further opportunities to perhaps condense some of our reserves and improve analysis and reporting. And it would be our goal moving forward that in line with the policy that we would bring forward an annual reserve report as part of our year-end reporting. So we would still bring balances forward as part of the budget, but the wholesome review would be earlier in the year, report would be earlier in the year as part of our year-end reporting. So I'll turn it back over to Laura to discuss the rates.
So the rates, Corp 2025-85 represents the 2026 water and wastewater calculated rates. It presents assumptions and criteria. The actual report itself represents or has assumptions and criteria for developing the 2026 rates. The rates have been calculated once again on a full cost recovery, and it incorporates both consumption and the metered system. So this is just a quick review of how rates are calculated. For water rates, you take the water budget, you take out the fixed portion, which is 40%. Then you have your variable portion. So then you take the variable portion and you divide that by the estimated consumption, which is 4.7 million. So that gets you your water rates of $1.88 per cubic meter. On the wastewater side, you take your wastewater budget and you divide that by the water budget that is less the water-only accounts, because obviously you wouldn't be collecting sewer on water-only accounts. So you take your water budget less the water-only accounts, and that formula comes up with the 99.3% for your wastewater surcharge. This is a sample of a residential water bill that was in your report to council. The report to council also had 3 examples for ICIs, but I'm just focusing on the residential bill here. So just a quick overview, if you use 14 cubic meters, which is the average residential household in North Bay, you're going to see a monthly bill of around $99, which is an increase of $3.58. So I just wanted to have a visual for the different options that are available for council. You have presented in the report to council a 4% option, a 5.27% option, and a 6.28% option. The difference between these options is your usage of reserves. So the 4% option would increase your reserve usage to 1.4 million. The 5.27% option, which is recommended, is using 1.1 million. And if you chose to reduce your reserves back to the original phase out, it would be 6.28% of a increase. So that the differential on the end is telling you that if you drop the rates, the percentage increase to 4%, the bills would be $1.13 cheaper for an average household. And if you went to the 6.28% option, it would be $1.03 more than the recommended 5.27% increase. So I hope that provides a visual of the different options and what it means to the ratepayers. And that is the last of my presentation.
Thank you. I just want to begin by acknowledging the financial services team and everyone who's been involved in putting together the 2026 water and wastewater budgets for this year. I recognize the amount of work and effort that has gone into it, along with the presentation this evening that really gives council and the public and ratepayers a fulsome perspective of our water and wastewater budget. I also want to thank members of council who have forwarded their questions while they had been reviewing the budget documents ahead of the meeting. It allowed for staff to include many of the questions and the details in their presentation this evening, so thank you to those who did share those. I will be turning it over to Councillor Mitchell to chair the water and wastewater budget deliberations. I just want to note that we're going to focus first on the 2026 water and wastewater budget document itself before transitioning over to discuss the water rates, which would go along with the discussion of the amount of reserves used that we saw in the last slide. So I will now turn it over to Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So this evening we will be discussing the water and wastewater budgets for 2026. Between the 2 budgets combined, we're looking at a proposed total of $29,988,461, which represents an increase of $1,450,205, or a net 5.2% increase if we go with the recommended amount, pardon me. At this time, I'd like to invite Alan Carell and Karen Pratt to join Laura, who's lucky enough to be able to stay at the front for now. Alan Carell, for anyone who doesn't know, is our interim city engineer, and Karen Pratt is the Director of Water, Wastewater, and Environmental Services. And in case we didn't say it earlier, Laura Boissonneau is the Director of Financial and Deputy Treasurer for the City of North Bay. Following their presentation, we will have questions on each section of the budget as it's been presented, and people will be available at the front, as you see here, to be able to answer our questions. So thank you for coming down, and I look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, okay, we're going to go through the executive report for the water and wastewater budget. We'll go through the big lines first, and then we'll open up for questions after. Basically, the personnel costs increase for 2026 is 6.95%, and that's basically, most of it is the increase that the wages for the employees, and that's the union contract and the other contracts. And there's no new people, it's all the same people, it's exactly the same number of people who have been in the past. The next section is the goods and services section, and that's got a 5% increase approximately. And there's basically two fairly substantial increases in it to make it the 5%. One is utilities, which is about a 10% increase. And the other one is the insurance premium costs. That's roughly 200 of the $285,000 in increase for that section. The next section is the financial expenses, and if you have questions on that, that's more on Laura's area. And the next is the capital and reserve transactions. Again, that's a 13.42% increase. And the next part was the internal transfers, and that's basically the equipment. It's through the fleet system with the extra costs that it takes to run the equipment in the process. And that's basically all the expense side, which shows at a 5.82%, and then increases in the revenue. Well, the revenue is it's in the water and sewer rates, and that's how you work out your water and sewer rates going backwards. And I don't know if you have any particular questions on any of those items in that area, and then we'll try to answer them. And
Okay, so we'll break it down to sections. Thank you very much for the presentation. First, we'll look at personnel. Are there any members of council that have any questions regarding the personnel section of the budget? You put your hand up? You were kind of hesitating. I wasn't sure for a minute, Councillor Raybosh.
Well, but we're okay to go into on page 9 where it breaks it down?
You can ask your question and
Okay,
they'll
I just
answer
didn't
it
want to skip
accordingly.
ahead if we weren't supposed to.
No.
So just in regards to line 1003, it's not a lot of money, but I was just curious, the shift premium, is it because of the collective agreement, or is it, okay, it is a collective agreement. I just wasn't sure if we were having to call people up more often. The other question I had was, where was it here? Overtime, and I'm just wondering, are we seeing more breaks? Are things happening after hours? I was just looking to see what's causing the increase in overtime.
We're noticing more, it's the timing of the breaks, unfortunately, which we can't always predict, but what we're seeing is the timing of the breaks is occurring more readily after hours, which is leading to the overtime.
But would there be more breaks or less breaks happening? I'm just curious, and I know that sometimes it's, if we're not putting the right amount of money into capital, and, we've done a really good job over the years making sure capital, so we've usually seen overtime go down because we're seeing less breaks. I'm just wondering, is it just more, like, exactly just more of the timing, or?
And there's some big ones that were in there, and, the ones near Walmart and that sort of thing last year. And that's where we're targeting this year to put the lining system in, because it's an old 16-inch cast iron thing, and we're going to try to fix that. But that's where we're getting most of them, is in the very old pipes, the 100-year-old ones. And we've decided some of those big ones that we're going to do more lining.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions regarding personnel? Councillor King?
Just to follow up, thanks for the report, Alan. Just to follow up again, back to line item 1101, overtime full-time. And when we look at the actuals in 2024, we're at 340. 2025 goes down to 279. And then 2025 budget goes down to 257. It appears to me that the general trend 2024, 2025 is that it's trending down as far as overtime is concerned. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
But why are we trending up? Council review numbers in 2026 go to almost 300,000.
Sorry, the date of the report is October 21st, so under 2025, it's only up to October 21st.
It's only which?
It's only up to October 21st.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions regarding personnel? Seeing none, we'll move on to goods and services. Does anyone have any questions regarding that section of the budget? Councillor Bayrosh?
Thank you. So on page 10, it would be line, where's my line here? Consumption credits. Is that the one where if somebody, if their water, if their water leaks or whatever, they get that one-time get-out-of-jail-free card?
Yes, it is, yeah. That's the bill write-downs, and the one above it is the low flush toilets and the $5 signups. So those are the two sections. 3088 is your $5 signups and your low flow toilets, and 3089 is the bill write-downs if there's leaks, large bills.
So are you able to speak to a little bit to, so we, in 2025, the actuals so far are 21,000, which is about double what we would normally, or what we saw the year before. I was just wondering what's happening in people's homes, or is it just, is it an anomaly? Is it something that we're seeing more frequently?
Dan's my expert.
It's not just people's homes, though. It can relate to businesses as well, so it just depends on the impact of it.
Oh, can you come up to the mic and answer, please? Thank you.
We got him up here.
So the impact isn't just specifically to residential, it's also ICI impacts. So it really depends on how long the issue occurred and how big the volume was. So to do individual comparisons year over year, you'd really have to look at what type of consumption credit was submitted.
So maybe I will take this, because when I said, I know when I said get out of jail free card, but maybe it's a good opportunity, because now we're doing these meetings in a different way, so just maybe explain what I meant by the one time, like if they have a leak in their home, I'll let you say.
Yeah, so there's an application that's done for any incident that a resident feels that they would be approved for under the provisions of the bylaw, which allow us to provide or review an application for consumption that is in excess of in excess of 5 times what their normal use is, which we establish using past consumption. And then if they qualify for that and prove that the plumbing issue had been corrected, then we have an opportunity to provide a 50% rebate on the excess use.
So sorry, just to follow up on that. So has it changed a little bit? Because it used to be that you want to be smart about the one time you would use it, because if it was just a small leak and your bill was just maybe $20 higher, you would want to wait. If you had an incident where like maybe you were gone away for a month and you had so much water leaking, and you guys would normally, I thought it was that you went back and you gave them their average bill or whatever their normal consumption is, and they got it just one time.
For the consumption credit, we give them only 50% of what we deem to be the excess. So we take out what their normal use would be, and then we take 50% of that that's left, and then we give that back. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that.
Okay, are you done? Okay. Any other councillors have questions for goods and services? Councillor Mallough?
Thank you, Chair. When I reviewed this over the weekend, I didn't have in my head, it just came up when it was mentioned, the PFAS remediation. I was just wondering which line that is and if it is included in this budget.
Okay, I'll respond to that. The 25 PFAS costs aren't included in the 2026 water and wastewater budget, so we won't be taking questions on that tonight. The airport remediation project is a capital initiative mostly funded by the federal government, and the city's share was already approved in a previous budget. For those who would like to learn more, there's a public session this Wednesday from 3 to 8 p.m. at the Best Western. Presentations will be made there by the city, D&D, and the health unit, and MECP. We encourage everyone, including the public, who is interested to attend. future costs are being considered outside the budget process at this time. Do you have any questions, Councillor Mallah, that don't relate to PFAS?
No, no, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Inch,
I have a question about the planned debt that wasn't issued. May I ask that?
do you have a question about, pardon?
The planned debt that wasn't issued?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Can you clarify why the planned debt wasn't issued in 2025 and whether delaying it poses any risk to the taxpayers?
Right, so debt is issued when the expenses are incurred, so if the projects are behind, we're not going to issue a debt ahead of the projects being complete. So we do take a wholesome review of what projects, what stages they're at, if they're gonna finish before the end of the year, or if it's gonna go into the following year. If project completion is gonna go into the next year, we wouldn't debenture this year.
And a follow-up question? So it's more about project completion.
Correct.
Thank you.
Substantially completed.
Thanks.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions regarding goods and services within the, Councillor Verbosch?
Sorry, but Laura, I think you'll be able to do this one. So in regards to the, and I just want to go back to the rebate, so the $5, so if people sign up for online billing, are we still seeing, or are we still doing pushes on that? Because I sometimes find that as much as, people I work with or people that I associate with, and I talk about the portal where you can see your water consumption. Do I have a leak? Is it a small leak? Is it just, they don't know, a lot of people still don't know a lot about that. So I'm wondering too about the $5 rebate to go to online billing, or to get the online bill. Are we still doing a really big communication push on that?
So that's a really good question. Dan and I have spoke on this. We are in a capital project right now to try to upgrade some meters. There was a report to council that came forward to bring $26 back so that we could expedite some of the meter and I'm going to probably say MIU upgrades. Once we get that done, there is a software that we are going to be providing that's going to provide better data to the ratepayers. And so there will be some campaigning and some information sessions and hopefully maybe the $5 initiative. There'll be some sort of programming that will be following up in next year.
Perfect. Hopefully the new system has alerts that can tell you, because unless you log in, you don't.
I believe they do.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
And then in regards to the low-flow toilet, same thing with the communication and pushing it out to let people know that you can get, is it 2 rebates for 2 toilets in a lifetime?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm going to say yes, but I don't want to misspeak, so.
I just want them to keep coming up.
So we don't, we're not advertising it per se out in the public for like media or social media stuff. We do advertise it anytime that we get one of the consumption credits or anytime a customer contacts us and we help them try and identify that it may be a toilet issue. It's one of our standard statements to them that if you find the leak or if you identify that it is the toilet, we also have a low flow rebate if you want to purchase a new toilet to fix the problem.
But anybody can access, like, I know that we don't advertise it, but anybody, if they did, they could apply for it at the city.
Yep.
Okay. And then if we had a really big uptake, then I guess you'd come back and say, we need more money because I keep announcing it.
Correct.
Finished?
Okay. Councillor Horsfield, please.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Alan, you mentioned the utilities is up about 10%. What makes up that part of the utilities increase? And are you mitigating any of those impacts when it comes to utility increase costs?
I think in general, it's the electrical and we actually are decreasing slowly the amount of electricity we use. We're doing a lot of that. It's just the rate increase this year is high, so that's why it's showing up. It's not because we're using more electricity. We're using probably exactly the same amount we did last year, and but the costs are going up.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other councillors have questions? Okay, we'll move forward to financial expenses, financing expenses. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Verbosch?
Is this where we're going to have the, like, do you want to have the Folsom Reserve conversation, or is that going to be a separate one?
Nope, that'll be a separate
Okay,
one.
then I'll.
No question? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. The capital reserve transactions have been discussed. Does anybody want to hear that presentation again or wait for the Folsom Reserves presentation? Seeing no hands go up, we'll go with that. Internal transfers, does anyone have any questions on that? Seeing none. Revenue, does anyone have any questions on revenue? Boy, you guys are really cooperative tonight till we get to another section. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move forward on that. I'd like to thank Laura, Alan, and Karen for their presentation this evening and answering the questions. I will now turn the meeting back over to Deputy Mayor Horsfield.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I will try to follow suit in the way that you chaired that. So we'll now turn over to the 2026 water and wastewater rates. And we have Laura, who's come down, or stayed down, I should say. So Laura, do you mind pulling up the page 24 of the presentation, please? And Shannon, I don't know if you want to come down as well or just wait to see if there's any questions that you'll need to answer. So currently, Laura, do you mind making that full screen, please? Thank you. It's okay. Currently, we are looking at the 5.27, which includes the reserve usage of just over 1.1 million. And it translates into the monthly bills for residential, with the average consumption being 14 cubic meters at $99.27. We also have the ICI 1-inch meter breakdown there as well for the water rates. So I don't know if you have anything further to add to this section or if we just want to open it up for discussion. If council is in favor of maintaining the 5.27, or if we're looking at adjusting it either up or down based on the parameters provided to us. So I'll open it up for discussion. Councillor Raybosh.
I was just wondering if there's a possibility to have the reserve conversation before we get to the rates, just because some people might have a different opinion once you have that conversation, or maybe there's, you know, some aha moments that come out of the reserve conversation.
So the water rates is proposing using reserves, so you're welcome to ask your questions about reserves at this point.
So this is my chance? You guys ready? Okay. So normally, I guess, people have like a 3 or 4 year phase out, right? When you use reserves, and then, but we're going to be going on 8 by the time, because we're looking at 2030 now.
So the 4-year phase out, or the first year with 3 years following, was meant for the first year that we used it. So because we already have reserves in the budget right now, to just immediately remove the 825, if that would, even if we just stuck at that number, would put a significant pressure this year on the budget. So we continued on with the phase-out plan. The only difference is that because we had received the additional WSIB premium rebate, we held it at the 825 for 1 more year, and then continued with the phase-out plan instead of phasing it out in 2026. Again, up to council, that's for council's discretion, but that was what we had recommended.
Because I think when some of the questions I tried to give ahead of time, tried to find Laura, was just to say, and it is that true impact, right? Like, if you look at the amount of reserves we've used, and by the time we end up phasing out, at some point, reserves are meant to be one time only. And so we're using it to offset operating costs that we know are not going to go away, because with water and sewer, you don't usually cut those things, right? So I'm just looking at, like, what would the impact be, like, at the end? Like, so when you phase it out, is there no impact anymore? Like, what is the impact? Like, are we going to see double digits at some point when we actually get out of this little kind of?
In terms of the percentage increase?
So I did run a scenario with, if we did not use reserves for 2026, your increase would be 9.28%.
And then some of the other questions I had was in regards, because I think the first thing that got me was that I looked at the budget from last year, and then I said, if we're phasing out, we seem to be going the opposite way because it added, I think, another 500,000 this year. Is that correct?
280.
Oh, that would be if, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So if we went from 825 to the 600, if we had dropped it by 75%, then we would have lowered the operating reserve and we wouldn't have any capital. So because we've introduced capital and we've held, that's how you're getting that 400 and something number.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say, because what year did we complete the asset management plan that had water and sewer in it?
A few years ago now.
Yeah, at 2022, I believe you had to have your core infrastructure. By 24, we had to start adding in the other assets, and then the update now is it's all-encompassing.
Are you referring to the original?
We're just going to take from this other reserve, and we'll balance it out. But if we're over, and we're at 11 point, I think it was 11.7 million, we're obviously above the target, but could we not use, like if you look at the asset management plan, I don't think we're using it to what we've reviewed it, we've been told by the province to use it as your guiding, document. And I don't think in the last few years we've actually tied asset management to when we talk about reserves or when we talk about capital.
So in the reserve section of the presentation, when I had mentioned next steps and what I think the next thing that we need to do in 2026, so the updated asset management plan with the service levels are coming to council in the next couple of weeks.
December 9th.
Yeah, December 9th. So once that's done and we have the time and capacity to turn our attention to it in the new year, I definitely think you're correct that in working with Hempson, one of their observations was that municipalities are starting to set targets for capital based on replacement values and not necessarily on your annual spend. So again,
just for now. The only thing is, and this is not, this is a direction from our council to staff, but it's unfortunate that we're looking at this now, and we'll only say that after we pass our final budget for our term. And yet, it would have been nice for us to do our last one with all that information, but that is a direction of council, not the direction of staff. So the last one I had was, when you talk about combined water and wastewater, and I don't know why I've never asked this question, but how can you look at a combined when wastewater users don't pay, if you're not a wastewater user, you don't pay for it. So it's always been kept separate. So how can you look at it in a combined way?
That's a great question. Can you go back to the slide that had the split for?
Sorry, which one?
Yeah. So that's a great point because in preparing for the reserve report and putting this presentation together, when we had noted that there's opportunities for better alignment and improving the policy, I think that's an area. So the policy target says water and wastewater combined, but then I think in some of our operational practices, we've started recognizing that we know that they're funded from different sources, but in recognition of that, trying to talk about them separately. So if you look at the variance report talks about them individually, not collectively. So we haven't been consistent, and I think that's where earlier when I said opportunity to enhance our reporting is be consistent, so have separate targets, and then we report on it that way. When we looked at the phase-out plan that has it combined, and I mentioned that it's within target. Individually, it would still be within the target as well. It would be at the low end of the target, but I did consider that. I just forgot to mention that, so I apologize when I presented that.
Mayor Chirko.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor, and thanks for your presentation tonight. When we take a look at after the balancing out or the rebalancing of the reserve funds to make up in one deficit that we're not at our target and where we are, what does that leave us approximately left over?
In terms of the ending balance?
Within those ranges that we've sort of established.
Yeah, so It puts us on the operating stabilization side within the middle of the combined, if we're looking at a combined target, or at the lower end of the individual, water, wastewater individually. And then the capital, if you can please flip to the next slide, we are on a combined basis above the target still with that phase-out plan.
So with that in mind, and especially with the capital side being substantially above where we thought, is it best practice to remain it at that level, or allow it to remain at that level while we look at that asset management plan, while we look at whatever shortfalls that may come with our capital funding policy?
At this point, I think so. Like, that was based on the policy that was recently reviewed by the long-term financial committee. The target that was maintained at that point was the 40%. So the proposed recommended phase-out plan and the transfers to realign it was keeping us either within it or slightly above it, and then providing us with that opportunity to do a wholesome review.
So when we take a look at that, and I know the numbers are, they move around a little bit, but when we take a look at that overall, combined $11.7 million, then we have our transfers and bring those up. We're still going to be slightly above, which will give us some room as we look at that asset management plan next year to make sure that whatever the handoff is from there, that there is that cushion.
Based on the current policy, correct. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Deputy Mayor.
No problem. Councillor Mala.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again for the presentation. I just had a couple of questions based on the presentation that was done a bit earlier. Please tell me if it's the wrong time. I think it's the right time, though. Shannon, you mentioned that we do receive interest on discretionary water and wastewater capital reserve funds. I'm wondering, I noticed that the numbers remain the same for the water and wastewater stabilization reserve fund, so I'm just wondering if we do receive interest on that or not.
So back in 2015, there was a policy committee struck of council, and during that particular update, it was recommended and approved that that not all of the reserves received interest any longer, and that only reserves with future inflationary components, so therefore capital, received interest, and that the operating reserves no longer received interest. That I'm strictly talking discretionary, because the obligatory reserves are required to earn interest either from a regulatory perspective or in accordance with the agreement. So they have always and continue to earn interest. I'm just talking about when council, the committee reviewed the discretionary reserve policy, it was decided at that point in time that it would only be transferred to capital and not operating reserves.
Okay, thank you. Please let me know if this is not, I'm going too down a hole. Can I ask what the downside of accumulating interest on discretionary reserves are? Again, if it's too far down a hole, let me know.
So I believe part of the decision at the time was that when we look at the general tax levy funded budget, there's revenue from interest that is a revenue source in that budget. And so back when that policy committee was reviewing it, interest rates were fairly low, or investment rates were fairly low. So in order to be able to meet the budgeted amount that was in the operating budget and continue to send interest to the discretionary reserves, it was a challenge. So it was looked at to put pressure on the operating budget at the time. So if you only were earning so much interest and you were allocating it all to your operating type reserves, then less was going towards operations in the year. So that was a decision at that point in time that was made.
Thanks, I really appreciate that historical background. That's really helpful. I have one more question, if that's okay, Chair. Laura, I really appreciated the part of the budget where you just discussed considerations briefly, and I'm wondering if, and perhaps this can be an email if it's too detailed, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more around how we consider climate change within how we factored into the planning. However,
For what I understand, with climate change, it can put pressure on like your waterways and your water, and then it's the plants that has to deal with that. I'm not an expert on it by any means, and I can definitely come back with some wholesome answers. But that's the one example that I understood when I was reading it.
thank you. I didn't want to spring it on you. It just
Yeah,
really sparked my
I
interest when
appreciate
you
that.
mentioned it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. So back to the interest discussion. Shannon, you said that in the future, our new reserve policy will be addressing the issue of interest earned by water reserves, that they would remain within the water realm. Is that true, or?
It's definitely something that we could look at as part of the update. I don't think I specifically mentioned that, but I know that it's come up over the years in terms of how do we allocate it between the different budgets and the different components. I do believe that over the years, the question has been raised in terms of do we allocate interest income to the operating budget for water and wastewater. And again, I think historically those reserve balances were smaller in comparison to the other balances. And then from a broader cash forecasting and handling perspective, the water system has accounts receivable and outstanding bills. So there's other timing differences on the cash flow. So I think that, again, it was decided not to go down that route, but it's definitely something that as the water and wastewater reserves have grown and on the operating side that we could take a look at it and come back with recommendations in that regard as well, because I do think it keeps coming up.
Just so it's clear in my mind, so the discretionary reserves in water and wastewater, the interest that's earned goes to the general operating budget, not to the operating budget of water and sewer, right?
It goes to the capital funds in water and wastewater, and then and other reserves, and then the difference would go to the tax levy funded budget.
Even though they're different ratepayers in that sense, right? The taxpayer is property tax based, and the water and sewer users are ratepayers in a different scenario, right? So you're taking money from one user group and putting it into the other. So that's why I'm interested to make sure that when we reevaluate the policies, that it's fair. So thank you.
Understand.
Councillor Inch.
Thank you. And so, as I'm new to council, I'm wondering, was there ever a time when water and wastewater reserves were completely separate in the budget? Like, in terms of, okay, so if we're talking about how, some people don't pay for wastewater, but they pay for water, I guess my point would be, would those people who don't pay for the wastewater still be affected if there was a failure in the system?
So in terms of infrastructure failures or costs related to maintenance and repairs, it is segregated between sanitary sewer and water within our capital budget as well as within the operating budget. So the expenses are charged to the appropriate user base.
However, should there be a wastewater failure, does that affect our entire population?
So if there was a wastewater failure, let's say there was a unplanned capital requirement, then that's likely where we would come back and use the wastewater capital reserve, which was originally funded by wastewater users.
Thank you.
Councillor King.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Laura and Shannon and John. I just wanted to get back to that, the 2023, the 2 WSIB rebates that are mentioned in the report. And it indicated that a portion of that was going to be used to increase or to decrease basically the overall increase. That was mention in option 1, 5.27%. And I gather that we're going to have to use, what, 825,000 in reserves in order to pull down the actual increase. That's option 1, right? That's correct understanding. So the two WSIB rebates, how much were they? And how are they split? So we're using a portion of it to pull down the actual increase, but part of it is going back into reserves. Is that the understanding correct?
Yes, yeah, correct. So the total amount received was $2,357,000. That's what we received. And then we looked at different ways that we could segregate it on a weighted average, and we chose the wages. So we did a weighted average between general and water and wastewater based on salaries, because that's where it generated from.
Okay.
So we took total salaries, total wastewater and water salaries, and we used that weighted average to divvy up the WSIB refund.
Okay, well, that makes complete sense. Okay, I think I understand it now. There's been an awful lot of figures thrown around here tonight to try and understand. My goodness. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. So one quick question on the reserve analysis and stuff. And by the way, it's a great explanation with the charts and stuff, so it's really easy to understand. In terms of the closed capital projects from year to year to year, has there ever been a year where we closed out our capital projects and had a deficit? John, to your knowledge?
I don't recall any. Alan's been around for a lot longer. Alan, do you recall any? So,
Alan
once
said-
quite a while ago.
Sorry. So I guess my point is that when we look at all these analyses and stuff, we still may, in the future years, be contributed to the capital reserve once the closed projects are closed. So that's not accounted for in any of these analyses. It's more a comment, so thanks.
Councillor Bain, and then
Thanks for the presentation. I just want to circle back to the WSIB. It's going into a reserve.
Yes.
It's not going into operating.
So it would get.
Eventually, it's going to go into operating.
Yeah, so it would go, we receive it into operating this year. The recommendations to transfer it into the corresponding water and wastewater stabilization reserve to help fund that phase-out plan. And that's why we recommended to hold it at 825 this year as opposed to dropping it to 618, because last year when that phase-out plan was established, we didn't know that we were going to receive another rebate.
Okay. So it's not going to be like years ago, we had the OMERS pension holiday. So municipalities didn't have to pay OMERS for all of its employees for a span of 5 years. And then all of a sudden, we were elected, and all of a sudden, we had a 7.8 or 8.7% increase in OMERS. So we're not utilizing it the same way. We're actually taking the money that we've got from the WSIB, putting it into a reserve to use at a future time.
Right, and we have not adjusted or assumed in our benefit calculation that we would get another rebate. We're budgeting for the premiums that we are subjected to because it's unknown in the future if we would get another rebate or if it would be a charge. So that's correct.
Okay. And the target along the bottom, that 10%, 15% of the gross operating expenditures, was set by a council.
Correct.
That
was in
wasn't set
policy.
by the province, that wasn't set by anybody else, it's best practices. Some municipalities have them higher, Hopefully, nobody has them any lower, but the fact is that that was set by a council, and council gets to decide how the reserves are spent, whether we're going to use some of them to offset the cost increases.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Raybosh?
Thank you very much. Sorry. Just on the WSIB, it wasn't, what was it called just before WSIB took it?
The NEAR?
The NEAR. So it operates in the same manner that we could have to pay some years, is that correct? There could be surcharges. Okay. And then,
Those surcharges are based on your performance as well.
yep, no, I totally understand, but I'm just saying that, but sometimes we have to pay, sometimes we get money back. And we're always hopeful that, you know, we're doing a great job and people are safe. I'm assuming that's where we get it from. And so, I'm trying to remember, was there not, so if we have to pay, where does it come from?
So years ago, we did have to pay for under the NEAR program. Off the top of my head, we would have had to report that in our variance. So it would depend on that year if we would have had surpluses from other operations, like if we had savings in year from other operations, or it would have had to come from the stabilization reserves. That particular year, I don't remember off the top of my head, but you are correct in that we have had to pay in certain years.
So the question that I was actually putting my hand up to ask was, so I did pull up really quickly, but it's very long, the asset management plan. So it talked about that there was one, because I took the link from the city website that talked about the 2024 asset management plan. It actually showed that, I believe it was wastewater has a shortfall of $2 million a year, and water is a shortfall of $3.8 million a year of what we should be actually funding in it. And so when we're taking reserves, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, so we would normally do like, what is it, 1% for capital increases, right? But rather than actually just increase it, we're taking it from reserves, is that correct?
I'm not sure that I understand your question.
So rather than just increase it, so now, you know how sometimes we say that we're increasing the budget by 1% for the capital.
Mm-hmm.
Are we paying that increase that we would normally put into capital by using reserves?
So the policy for the capital levy on the water and wastewater side is a 2% increase. It's 1% on the tax funded side, so it's 2% plus a CPI. And so over the last couple of years, that CPI portion has been phased in because years ago it was taken out and then we were phasing it back in. So in contemplation of this year's tabling of the budget and what the recommendation was going to be, knowing that we still need to do that work to realign our policies with the asset management plan, and that there is a funding gap, we didn't want to say reduce the capital levy funding amount any further. So we're following the policy with the 2% plus the phased in CPI. That is the expense in that capital section of your operating budget. That's going to go fund the capital projects. But instead of that full amount hitting the ratepayers this year, we're saying we're funding $280,000, which was, I believe, close to the CPI additional increase this year with the capital reserve. So we wanted to still kind of leave the funding source to the capital budget alone, if you will, and fund it out of reserves instead of with new revenue collected this year while we had time to look at those policies.
But doesn't that have an impact on future years? Because if you're not actually increasing the budget, you'd have to double it, or you can't, like next year, unless you use reserves again to add the increase, at some point, it's going to catch up to us, is it not? Like, is it making sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, so we didn't take money away, if you will, from the capital budget. So I think in some years when it was said to cut the levy.
Oh, not to cut it, but just as we're supposed to increase, because if we want to keep adding to it, because if we're trying to close that gap, if we're not actually adding because we're taking it from reserves, so next year, if we don't use reserves to pay for that amount, you then have to put the 320, I think it's 325 from this year, plus the amount for next year. Is that not correct?
So on the capital side, we're still funding it in accordance with the policy with the CPI, but we're paying for it using some reserves on the operating side, which is why on the phase-out plan for capital, we didn't put in 280 and pull it right back out, because you're right, it would have put more pressure on the operating budget. But it's not affecting the capital plan, because we're still increasing our funding to the capital plan.
I may follow up with you again just
Okay,
after that, just
for sure.
because I just want to make sure that
Okay.
I'm fully getting it. So, and everyone keeps talking about, rebalancing, but to me, we're just shuffling things around. And we keep talking about realigning the policy, because we need to wait, but we've had that asset management plan for so long. But if it was council's direction, could staff, with this budget that we have here and then our next budget, actually look at the asset management plan and say, you may want, you would have to tweak your policy by doing this. If this was the intent of council to actually close that gap, start using the reserve funds and actually put it towards capital projects to close the gap. Is that something that we could do in a timely fashion, like before, like say March of next year when we've been passing budgets already? Like if it was council's will, I believe that we could do it, right? Or you could just say, you need to take time to think about that one.
I will say, I think that it's an undertaking that has been talked about for a long time. And because of a lot of competing priorities and other updates that were required, it didn't happen. So to now try to do that in a very short window of time would be a challenge. But it's ultimately up to council to give staff direction on what is required.
Any further questions? Councillor King.
Actually, just kind of a follow-up to what Councillor Bain asked. When we file our water financial plan in accordance with the Ontario regulations, do we indicate to the province what our reserves are? And is there some requirement on the province's part to indicate what those reserves should be? Because obviously, we're all hearing that if we don't have reserves and proper reserves in place, then the water and sewer system could actually be in jeopardy if there was a problem. That's my thinking. So is there anything that we have to file with respect to reserves at the provincial level?
So reserves are included in the plan. So they look, it's a wholesome review. Like they're looking at grants, reserves, DCs, your anticipated rate revenues. So that is considered in the plan. The plan was supposed to be submitted with another part of the application. Karen would be able to speak to that a little bit further. So this is definitely a part of that. It goes to the ministry and it is reviewed. I'm not versed on what the ministry does, like what scrutiny that they do at that time. And I don't know if we get a report card back. So I'd have to look into it. I suspect that they do review it, but that's a presumption on my end.
Just in terms of the phase-out plans and the use of the reserves, that was included as part of the long-term plan that Hemson had assisted with. So they based the forecast on the 2026 preliminary budget, or the 5.27%, because they had to base it on something as a starting point. And so they were provided with the phase-out plan for both the water, operating, and capital, and that was incorporated into their forecasting model.
And that would be one of the examples where we say it's a living document. And we have staff now that's committed to keep that document going every year. Like we do plan to take the model that they've worked with us and continually update it. So if council's wish was to say we're changing our reserve philosophy, we would have to update the plan and see what that looks like.
But you did hear Andrew from Hemson say that our plan was reasonable over the 10-year period.
Correct.
Councillor Bain.
Thank you. During the Hemson presentation, they talked about the 60% of the development charges have to be spent in year. I'm aware that there are municipalities that are changing their reserve ratios because they now have to spend money for infrastructure projects because their ratios were higher because they haven't been using their developments. They've been just banking them for a considerable amount of time. So will the fact that we have to spend our development charges, now that we have them again, is that going to impact the reserves?
So the development charges fall in the obligatory category. They're not one that council sets the target for. They're, as you just mentioned, the legislation dictates the usage of it. And so my understanding is that it's not actually 60% in year, is that you have to have allocated 60%, so we can allocate it throughout our 10-year plan. And one of the things that some municipalities are a little different than how we've done it. So some municipalities have taken out debt and have projected that their principal and interest payments would be funded through future collection of DCs. We have never taken that kind of aggressive approach based on our growth patterns and our growth required capital projects. So we have always, when we've put the capital budget, or as long as I can remember, police recently that were applicable.
Any further discussion on the water wastewater rate options? I'm not hearing anyone speaking to lowering it to 4% or increasing it to 6.28. So the sentiment is that we'll have 5.27% be the tax rate, or sorry, the water rate option that will be going forward to the public meeting on November 26th. Perfect. So I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Mitchell, who will read the motion for the 2026 water and wastewater budget. And as I mentioned, the special committee meeting, public meeting, is on November 26th at 6 p.m. And this is the opportunity for members of the public to speak to the water wastewater rate options. Thank you again, Laura, Shannon, John, and team for coming out this evening and for sharing a very broad information from the water financial plan to reserves to the budget and the water rates. It was a lot of work, and I want to acknowledge that, so thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I'll read the motion moving forward. One, that council approve the 2026 water and wastewater operating budget in the net amount of $28,988,461 as per attached Appendix A. 2, authorize the transfer of $317,746 from Reserve 99580R Water Treatment Surcharge to Reserve 99576R Water Operating Reserve. 3, authorize the transfer of $1 million from Reserve 99522R Water Systems Completed Capital Reserve to Reserve 99576R Water Operating Reserve. And 4, to authorize the transfer of $300,000 from 99575R Sanitary Sewer Completed Capital Reserve to Reserve 99577R Sanitary Sewer Operating Reserve.
One more time.
No. And that will be the motion being voted on. And a recorded vote.
Can I ask a question? I had my hand.
You want to ask me a question?
Well, I just want to ask procedure. So I understand the expenses that we have. When I look at the budget, that part, it's the reserves. So I don't know if it's possible to separate out the transfer of reserves, or if it's all encompassing, like you can't do one without the other.
I would,
It's all
I would
encompassing?
challenge that it's all encompassing, because that's how we got to the rate decision that council just made as a group. Okay?
So again, the motion that will be brought forward, or the recorded vote, will be to bring the committee report forward to council. Councillor Mitchell?
Yes.
Councillor Lowry?
Yes.
Councillor Inch?
Yes.
Councillor Gardner?
Yes.
Councillor King?
I agree.
Councillor Horsfield?
Yes.
Councillor Millar?
Yes.
Councillor Vraybosh?
No.
Councillor Bain?
Yes.
Mayor Chirico?
Yes.
The motion is carried.
And also just wanted to note that since we were able to do this in one meeting, that there is no meeting tomorrow or Thursday as we've completed the business of general government and infrastructure and operations. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, and that's the close of the meeting. Thank you.